It's a bad poem.
That's a bad poem. And why would you say that's a bad poem?
It's full of doggerel.
Can you talk more about that? What do you mean?
The phrases are very unimaginative and obvious, and many of them look borrowed from other sources and not really thought through. In many cases, they don't really apply to the metaphors aren't interesting.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a young person. He was very young then, wanting to be a poet and thinking that in order to be a poet, you had to sound, quote, poetic, which means you had to be using, expectations for poetry from earlier times. It had to be very flowery. It had to be very gracious. But I wanted you guys to see that because then you can better experience the radical shift that he makes when he gets to diving into the filthy Passaic River, and the voice that issues from then on. I mean, Williams, like Eliot, wrote a bunch of really flowery kind of late Victorian poetry as young poets. Eliot did too. Eliot loved Tennyson. I think Tennyson is a great poet, but Eliot, if you think about The Wasteland, that is not Tennysonian poetry. Um, so it's just interesting to me to see their early stuff and then to see it's sort of like they picked themselves up by the nape and gave themselves a good shake. And then when they hit earth again, they were sounding different. But there are other examples of poems that Williams wrote that I would say I don't think are good poems. And that's because, um, with a poetic approach, the way he had just jotting down, sometimes his poems are just sort of jottings. Um, which keeps him flexible. It keeps him creating, but not everything turns out to really have any kind of interest or complexity that I would think would make a good poem. Let me see if I can find something just at random. Is it sort of
Is is there a way to, I
like
mean,
sort of doodling or
this is
something?
like in every art. I have musician friends that just absolutely state this song sucks.
Hmm.
And same with poetry. Is there any objective criteria for what's a good poem or not?
No, it really depends. I mean, it's very subjective.
It's a philosophical
That
question.
is a philosophical question. Yeah, it's very subjective, but I would say that there are things that we can be looking for. Um, I was talking to Bob Hass once at a writing conference, and he's an amazing poet. And he had been U.S. Poet Laureate and he won Pulitzers and so on and so forth. Really nicest person in the world. And we were talking about experimental poetry because his wife Brenda Hillman writes really experimental poetry. And I said, "How can you tell if it's any good?" And he said, "Is it interesting?" And I really thought about that. Is like, is it interesting? You know, sometimes we have to learn how to read stuff that's very different from what we're used to. It's stretching our little poetry muscles. But if it's boring or if it's just show offy for no reason, then I would say that's not good poetry. If you can read it and give it your serious attention, like I'm a big fan of Brenda. I really like her work, a lot of it. And it's very, very experimental and it's not easy, but I get a lot out of it. But there are poems that are just like you read them and you're like, oh, okay, so what? So one thing to look for is the use of language interesting? Because as Williams said, a poem is a large or small machine made of words. That's all a poem is words. That's the only tool that a poet has is words. He can't literally hand you, the apple on a plate. He can't hand you Venus, but he can evoke through language a whole world of experience and feeling and thought by using language.
And that reminds me of Picasso with little doodles, just something on a napkin, and the line, the use of small lines, and they're just like they're like tossed off, they're like practice, but
Yeah,
there's of line and um something that it's something that it's Picasso line. It's not even if it's the tiniest little like doodle of something
yeah,
just and that sense, I mean, it feels like that's kind of the way people use who are real poets use words, that there's and some of them are just going to be like a scribble as it were,
yeah.
but
But
something very personal or distinctive about it and using it in a way that maybe the rest of us wouldn't think to do.
Yeah,
But isn't it the case that, I mean, Anne, like you're about as distinguished a poet as anyone I'm ever going to know. And I bet there are other similarly distinguished poets that wouldn't agree with you about what is a good poem and what isn't.
of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Because it's an art form. There's no, I mean, you can tell if a math problem is right or wrong.
Right.
There's not, poetry isn't a science, you know? But here's what I'd say. They better have some good arguments. It's like, is not a good argument. When I was in grad school, I had this wonderful professor, French Fogel, who was very dapper, sort of the whole Brooks Brothers suit type guy. And we had this, I liked her a lot, but she's kind of a wise ass student in first year grad school named Pat. And one day we were talking about, I don't know, a poem by like, Donne or Crashaw or something. And he said, Miss So and so, what would you say? And she said, eh. And he said, and what school of criticism would that be part of? You know, it's like, get serious,
Yes, but isn't it the case that there's no amount of arguing that could convince you that a poem that you don't like is good, no
No.
matter how sophisticated the argument was?
Yeah. Go
Put
ahead.
it this way. If the argument got you to look at the poem and see something that you hadn't seen before that you really felt was in the poem, it could convince you.
Yeah.
Just as an abstract argument, it couldn't possibly convince you unless you were too easily influenced. But
I think, I'm sorry.
go ahead. This is
I was
another
going to say,
subject, but go ahead.
I was going to say, and never in my life has somebody convinced me that a piece of music that I hate is great just because they've explained to me how intricate or wonderful the structure of it is. That's never
Sure.
happened.
No, that makes sense. There's a very difficult Hart Crane poem, The Wine Menagerie, that he patiently explains line by line to Harriet Monroe or somebody. And, he explains exactly what he means by it, but the poem doesn't say that. And his explanation is therefore not very convincing.
Yeah.
But I wanted to respond to something Laurel said about the Picasso lines, because it reminded me of something William Blake said. And of course, for him, a line is a line engraved or painted and a line of poetry. A line or lineament is not formed by chance. Straight or crooked, it is itself in its most minute subdivisions and not intermeasurable with or by anything else. That's a great statement that I think does resonate with like what makes poetry.
Yeah. Barry?
Yeah, I would wonder too if the approach to poetry, like somebody like Williams, who's writing poems all the time and just dashing them off, kind of. So he's probably not doing a lot of self-editing. He's just kind of spewing it out, as opposed to Eliot, who seems like his poems are worked, maybe even overworked, to a point of, seeming till he feels they're right. So I would guess that a poet like Williams probably did have a lot of stuff that he wrote down that wasn't really wonderful, but maybe he didn't choose to edit it later out of his work. He just sort of let it all stand.
Yeah, later in his life, Williams did a lot more editing. For instance, in Patterson Book 4, we're not going to be able to read Patterson because it's not available online, but it's his book-length epic, and it's pretty wonderful and crazy. But he did a lot of editing and rewriting in Book 4 because he just couldn't get it the way he wanted to, Alan.
I think one of the benefits of this series of courses for me is to help me to see that a person brings a certain genius and skill set to their art, whether it's philosophy or poetry, that allows me to appreciate why they're remarkable, and at the same time, I don't like them. I
Yeah.
mean, I felt with T.S. Eliot, for example, I've been familiar at a superficial level with him and his poetry most of my life.
Mhm.
And I understand that it's remarkable, but it's not anything that I have particularly enjoyed or wanted to steep myself in. And, I think in this class, um, Anne succeeded in really showing why Eliot was a great poet. And he can be a great poet, and I can appreciate that and still not like him.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. Mm.
and I feel like this the same way about um, some philosophers, like Nietzsche, for example. I just don't like the guy. But that doesn't mean that he wasn't a brilliant contributor.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Other comments? So Deborah asked a question too, which is, and I'm going to paraphrase, but correct me if I'm wrong. What makes a perfect line of poetry? Is that pretty much your question? Well, you're mute. You just muted yourself.
I did it wrong. Hi, everybody. Yeah, kind of. I mean, I was just thinking about also bad poems. There's that stupid famous one that's bad about by some woman about a tree.
Oh, that's
What?
Joyce
Joyce
Kilmer.
Kilmer, he
He
was
was
a
a guy.
man.
Yeah. Oh,
Don't
who was
blame
it?
women for him.
Who was it?
Alfred Joyce Kilmer, but he went by.
Exactly, Alfred. So everybody kind of acknowledges that's a bad poem, but there's lots of really banal, idiomatic kind of jejune things like Sharon Olds writes these simple things. William Carlos Williams writes these simple things.
Ogden
So
Nash.
so it's kind of still confusing to me as why is that Kilmer poem so recognizably bad when other very simple poems about, plums is brilliant. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out. But to answer your question, yeah, it's like the same question in reverse. Why is some language so evocative that you memorize it in a heartbeat?
Yeah.
There's so many lines of poetry that I have memorized that, like, I had memorized no one to witness and adjust, no one to drive the car. I'd forgotten that it was William Carlos Williams,
Mm-hmm.
but it's so evocative, whereas there's nothing in that Kilmer poem that I can't even remember it, except it's about a tree.
I think that
So,
you'll never see a poem lovely as a tree that lifts its arms to pray, blah, 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 gag, 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 It's very popular. I can tell you why that's a bad poem, because it has nothing to do with trees. And also because it automatically assumes that it's supposed to rhyme. It's supposed
It
to
rated a Mad Magazine parody.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, another thing about trees uh, is that it's comparing to things that are not in any way comparable, like a tree and a poem. It's like saying, I never saw an equation as lovely as a woman. And, the only answer to that is kind of duh. No.
Yeah. 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 Poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree. And you're like, oh, spare me. I mean, because it's the same as that early Williams poem. It's falling into all these cliches about what poetry is supposed to sound like. That it's supposed to have a beat up, beat up, beat up, beat up, beat up, and it's supposed to rhyme. And it's supposed to spout cliches unabashedly, and I'll tell you, if you teach poetry classes, a lot of kids still have that idea that that's what a poem is, you know, rather than something, as William says, words that bite their way home.
And I sympathize because in philosophy, everybody likes to say what they like to do is read somebody and then summarize it in some cliche that they already knew anyway,
Oh,
and then
yeah.
they can dismiss it
Yeah.
Yeah.
because
Yep.
I'm
Yep. So let's talk about some poems, okay? I mean, I would say Eliot has a really nice description in Little Gidding of poetry that really works for him. That beautiful description toward the end of Gidding about every word is in the right place. And it's like, yeah, you do. You instantly are moved by it. You instantly can remember it. And that can be as varied, that should be as varied as there are poets, good poets. Death is the mother of beauty, says Stevens. And once you run into that line, you're not going to forget it. It's like a great line, it makes you think. Whatever, rooted they grip down and begin to awaken. That moves me every time I ever read it. Yeah, okay, so let's look at some poems, okay? Let's look at group 3. So Tony, can we share?
Do you want them on screen?
Yes, please. Thank you. You laughing?
I'm laughing at the way I fit into the frame.
I know I can't. Well,
It's okay. I'm not going away.
I know you're not going away. You could put your head closer to me.
No, I don't want to be.
It's a matter of like holding it on my lap. I'm sitting on the floor. We're sitting on the floor of our
Just be comfortable.
Comfortable is not what's happening. Yeah. So we're going to start with Dedication for a Plot of Ground, which is a poem about Williams's grandma, this redoubtable grandma, whom he was so incredibly fond of. And Tony is working his magic here. So it's Williams 3.
What was her name? Emily what? Williams?
Dickinson.
Emily Dickinson. Williams.
Welcome.
That's right.
Emily Dickinson, welcome.
Yeah, okay.
Are you able to get it? Good, great. Good, great. Okay, so Dedication for a Plot of Ground. This plot of ground facing the waters of this inlet is dedicated to the living presence of Emily Dickinson Welcome, who was born in England, married, lost her husband, and with her 5-year-old son sailed for New York in a 2-master, was driven to the Azores, ran adrift on Fire Island Shoal, met her second husband in a Brooklyn boarding house, went with him to Puerto Rico, bore 3 more children, lost her second husband, lived hard for 8 years in St. Thomas, Puerto Rico, San Domingo, followed the oldest son to New York, lost her daughter, lost her baby, seized the 2 boys of the oldest son by the second marriage, mothered them, they being motherless, fought for them against the other grandmother and the aunts, brought them here summer after summer, defended herself against thieves, storms, sun, fire, against flies, against girls that came smelling about, against drought, against weeds, storm tides, neighbors, weasels that stole her chickens, against the weakness of her own hands, against the growing strength of the boys, against wind, against the stones, against trespassers, against rents, against her own mind. She grubbed this earth with her own hands, domineered over this grass plot, blackguarded her oldest son into buying it, lived here 15 years, attained a final loneliness, and if you can bring nothing to this place but your carcass, keep out. So let's do what we've done before. What do you notice about this poem?
I was shocked by the ending. I think that it's just, they're beautiful word pictures of kind of very familiar stages in somebody's life. And at the end, it's sort of, he does this kind of turn and he says, if you don't appreciate my grandma, screw you. I'm surprised by that anger.
Yeah. Yeah. If you can bring nothing but your carcass, keep out. Sure. What else do you guys notice? What's unusual about this poem?
Well, one thing it's almost prose, isn't it? I mean, it's interesting that it's a story, but the line breaks. It's what's interesting is the line breaks. She's not he's not letting you read it as a story,
right?
But it is a story. We're getting more and more and more about her, but he's just not letting it just. I I love the blackguard. It's like just the images he's got here.
Yeah. Yeah. Great images. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's highly narrative. It's a biography. And it's pretty much, as you say, the history of a whole life. you know. And again, look at the way he writes about women. He is not falling into cliches of, you know, the beautiful, lovely as a rose type woman. He really loves this woman, partly because she's his grandma, but partly because she is a tough old coot. She is like totally, you know, uncompromising in her stubbornness, in her saltiness, you know, and in what she endures. Lost her husband, lost her daughter, lost her baby, you know. And then verb choices like seized the two boys of the oldest son by the second marriage, mothered them, fought for them against the other grandmother. I mean, this is a woman whose life is full of scrappiness and confrontation, you know, and he loves that about her. He really appreciates that about her. But another thing that's remarkable about this poem is the sheer audacity of that list, that enormous list. Hang on, where did my poem go? It disappeared. Oh God. Okay, maybe I need to get smaller.
I like that he paid attention to his grandmother's life.
Yeah, me too.
All of these bits of her story.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
It doesn't sound like she's the sort of person who would sit around telling stories about herself so much. She was busy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. He pays attention to her. I mean, I think Williams is just a great writer about women. I really do, because he loves women. And he doesn't just love, you know, the pretty ones or the sexy ones. He loves them too. But he loves scrappy women, old women, babies, you know. Um, but this list is so amazing. If we scroll down a little bit, please, and we can see defended herself against thieves, storms, sun, fire, against flies, against girls that came smelling about. It cracks me up that he puts the girls right after the flies that come smelling about, you know, against drought, weeds, storm tides, neighbors, weasels that stole our chickens, against the weakness of our own hands. And weakness, of course, has the sound pattern of weasels, but now he's turning more inward, and then against the growing strength of the boys, against wind, and then against her own mind. And to me, that's really pretty heartbreaking. Defended herself against her own mind. It's like, what is he referring to there? Is he referring to senility or a deep sense of tragedy, hardship? What is it, you know?
Repression is what it seems to be if you defend yourself against your own mind.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone does that to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah. And just what she's experienced is pretty overwhelming in her life, you know? So that's dedication to the plot of ground. And then, as you say, the anger at the end, it's like there's a kind of interesting wit there too, because of course, by the time she's in the ground, she is a carcass, but she's uncarcassed by this poem. She's brought back to life. And so then he says, if you can bring nothing but your carcass, your own deadness, you know, keep out, go away. I don't want to hear from you.
So a biographical question. I assume she's the mother of Williams's mother.
No, she's the mother of Williams's father.
Okay. Well, and so his father also had this. Well, of course, he had a connection with Puerto Rico too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
But she was British.
Yes.
His dad was British.
Right. I
and
know
his
that.
mother was Puerto Rican.
Yeah,
so
his
this
father
Emily
was English.
Dickinson, welcome. She came to eventually
Yeah.
to the States
Well, the
under
Puerto Rico confused me.
checkered circumstances. Yep. Yep.
Why was he a sailor?
Who? The father?
No, Williams.
William Carlos Williams? No.
Yes.
No.
I'm questioning the line ran adrift on Fire Island Shoal. You run aground on a shoal. You don't run adrift
Yeah.
on it.
It's true.
Good call. Good call. No, he wasn't a sailor. He wasn't a sailor. Douglas?
Yeah, do we know where the piece of land is?
No, I don't know. I mean, presumably Rutherford, New Jersey. No, I don't know that, actually. I don't know that. There's a lot in Williams's day-by-day biography that I have forgotten. But if you want to know, just check out Paul Mariani's enormous biography called A New World Naked, which is really good and more than copious, you know.
A New World Naked?
Yeah.
Yeah. William Carlos Williams, A New World Naked.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's interesting that he dedicated this to a plot of ground, not to his grandmother.
Yeah.
What
I
do you
was
think that's
wondering whether
about?
this is written for a specific ceremony or particular event. It sounds like he's talking to an audience.
It does have that quality of talking to an audience. I don't know of any particular ceremony that he was speaking to, but he's always in a way collaring us as audience and talking to us, you know.
It's likely a fiction. No one would say this in a speech. I think no one would inscribe it on a stone, but he's imagining such a situation in which he can say exactly what he
Yeah.
knows and
Yeah.
feels about his grandmother as if it were a dedication for the plot of ground where she's buried.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then I wonder who his audience is and why he's excoriating them if they're indifferent.
We're the audience.
It's like
Yeah.
I don't like being excoriated.
I
No,
wonder if it's her burial plot.
yeah, it's her
Yeah,
burial
it's
plot.
gotta
It's
be.
where she's buried, sure. I mean, it's like anybody who would, kind of look down on her or not be interested in her or not really get into appreciating her toughness and so on, who would just pass by, not
It's
take.
it sounds like a tough thing that she might have said, and also he seems like he's defending her kind of like she defended against the grandmothers and against the girls that sniffed around, and
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very in character to her.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, he liked her. She was a toughie. Let's look at the next poem in this um part 3, which is again a very minimal poem. Between walls, the back wings of the hospital where nothing will grow lie, cinders in which shine the broken pieces of a green bottle. This isn't even a sentence, it's a phrase. So what's going on here? I mean, this might be a poem where you're like, so what, but I'm actually very fond of it. But what's going on here?
It's a sentence. Cinders is the subject and lie is the verb. It's if you take the back wings as being in apposition to walls, it's actually grammatical.
Yeah, but where nothing will grow lie cinders. It's not, it's like we never have the main.
Between walls where nothing will grow lie cinders.
Oh, okay. Okay. Phooey. Okay, it's a sentence. Forget it. I'm married to an English teacher. It didn't strike me as a sentence the billion times, but
It's
what's
an
going on
odd
here?
sentence.
What's going on here?
I think to me it's like he's referring to this place where nothing will grow, where it's nothing. There's cinders, but yet still within those cinders are these broken pieces of green bottle of little glowing something. There's something there, even though there's nothing that will grow there. It's not. It's even though it seems like a dead place. There's still images of beauty in it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Maybe a
he's
place where he went to between, for a break from being in the hospital.
Yeah. Or
I
just
was almost expecting, because of the word wings, a dragonfly or something alive and green. It just an insect.
Yeah. That's interesting. But
Yeah.
if you look at public buildings, there's such empty space in between the wings of buildings or behind buildings or whatever, and of course for Williams, green is a pretty magical color because it's the color of growth, it's the color of springtime, but there's nothing growing here because of industrialism, because of development and so on. But nevertheless, as you say, there's something sparkly, there's something shiny, even though it's broken. The broken pieces of a green bottle. What kind of green bottle is that? Is that like somebody's booze? Is that a medicine bottle? Do we care?
Yeah, beer or wine.
Yeah, but what we care is that it's shiny.
Right.
This is a poem that like a little kid's mind is at work here. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, look, that's pretty, But it's in a way a kind of springtime poem, just in a big stretch. I mean, it's like the coming of life is everywhere, even if that life isn't alive, and even if the place where it occurs is also not a place where things can grow.
It
Cinder.
also It also reminded me of, Frost looking down the well. For once, then,
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
A little glitter where you wouldn't
Yeah.
expect it.
Yeah. Nice.
Notice that the only place where there's a capital letter beginning a line is in which shine. He's
Mhm.
really drawing your attention to the one thing that's really interesting about this otherwise drab space.
Yeah. That's a nice point. Yeah. Good. Great. So I wanted to spend a few minutes talking to you. Well, first of all, let's move on a little bit and we'll talk about the desert, or we'll talk about the descent. Where did we go? We have to scroll down more because I'm a little bit out of order here. Okay. So I've written you a little thing here about the importance of this poem. Williams wrote an epic poem in 5 books called Paterson. And Paterson, of course, is the city next to Rutherford where he lived. He was chief medical officer at Paterson Hospital. He was really interested in the history of the falls, the history of development there, the history of the labor strikes, the history of industrial pollution, and so on. And in Paterson, which I would really encourage you to look at, it's very uneven. It's all over the place. It's his major attempt to get everything in his world into a poem, like everything, you know? So he's using sources there. He's quoting from historical sources. He worked on it for a decade. And it's quite moving. But in book 2, all of a sudden there's this poem, which later got to be called The Descent, which turns out to give him the direction for his late poetry. It's quite miraculous. By this time, he was suffering some really severe health challenges, both in the form of strokes and heart attacks. And after he finished his autobiography, which is called The Autobiography of William Cross Williams, he figured that he was done writing poetry. He figured that he just didn't have it in him anymore. But then he was invited to read the Phi Beta Kappa poem at Harvard. And he wrote this poem that I'm going to talk about next called The Desert Music. But the descent, and in this 3-part line, which he calls the triadic line, it really just opens his late poetry. It's so amazing. And it also opens the themes of his late poetry. So this is a man, by 1948, he is what, 65? 65. He would be considered to be old, although I don't think he's old. But he's really starting a new thing. The descent beckons as the ascent beckoned. Memory is a kind of accomplishment, a sort of renewal, even an initiation, since the spaces it opens are new places inhabited by hordes heretofore unrealized of new kinds, since their movements are toward new objectives, even though formerly they were abandoned. No defeat is made up entirely of defeat, since the world it opens is always a place formerly unsuspected. A world lost, a world unsuspected, beckons to new places, and no whiteness lost is so white as the memory of whiteness. With evening, love wakens, though its shadows which are alive by reason of the sun shining grow sleepy now and drop away from desire. Love without shadows stirs now, beginning to awaken as night advances. The descent made up of despairs and without accomplishment realizes a new awakening, which is a reversal of despair. For what we cannot accomplish, what is denied to love, what we have lost in the anticipation, a descent follows, endless, scroll down, endless, more up, and indestructible. So I would say To me, Williams's late poetry is genuinely wisdom poetry. It's poetry about confronting death. It's poetry about, and it constantly bears tribute to the imagination. The imagination, he says, is the hole at the bottom of the bag. The imagination is the one thing that need never fail us, even when the body is failing, even when the mind is failing. You know, um, by the time of Williams's late poems, he was typing with one hand, and sometimes he really couldn't even see the page.
Mm.
So this three-part line gave him a way of staying in track, like tab in twice, go back to the beginning. It's a way of not getting lost, but it's also a way of, I think, opening the poetry to fluidity, opening the poetry to flow, opening the poetry to, the waves of the sea. The sea becomes a really important image for him again, yet again, but it's the ongoing fluid movement of thought and time and love and imagination and memory. So there's a warning here for what cannot be accomplished, what is denied to love, what we've lost in the anticipation. A descent follows, endless and indestructible. So the whole work, I would say, of the late poems is not to deny things to love, is to keep accomplishing, is to keep uttering, to keep writing, And to my mind, Williams's late poems are really beautiful. They're really astonishingly beautiful. They're hard to get online, more than a few of them, but I would really suggest that you get a copy of the book called Pictures from Bruegel and Other Poems, which is published by New Directions, and read them because it's a joy. It's what won the Pulitzer Prize posthumously. It was published right before he died, but then it won the Pulitzer Prize the next year. So anybody want to talk about this poem at all? Like, does it seem really different from the earlier work?
One thing I notice is I think it's a very fine poem and very moving, but it's almost entirely abstract.
Mm-hmm.
It does not fit no ideas but in things at all. I think until you get to whiteness and then shadows, there's hardly anything that you could call a concrete image. But I don't think that's bad. I think it's the theory that falls down there because it can't account for a poem like this.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Along those lines, exactly, this stanza or phrase, for what we cannot accomplish, what is denied to love, what we have lost in the anticipation, a descent follows. Anybody want to parse that?
Well, the whole poem is, excuse me, the whole poem is about descending. The whole poem is about descending into old age and descending toward death, right? But there's a regeneration, a rejuvenation, or a not rejuvenation, but a regeneration that comes out of this descent, in that the poet is beginning to turn to and value memory. He's beginning to turn more inward. I mean, Williams, for all that I love him, he was not a particularly inward person for much of his life. He was very outward oriented, very busy, very focused on people and things around him. But with these incredible health blows, it's like all of the last years of his life, he was living on borrowed time because any next stroke could instantly kill him, you know? And so he's just, I think, really turning his attention and his attentiveness to what can be found in these conditions of great need, great, in a sense, poverty, you know? What do we do at old age?
What does the phrase, what we have lost in the anticipation, mean?
What do you think?
This is just a guess, but I think he's suggesting something like this. If we could accomplish everything we wanted to, if we never had to despair, if nothing were denied to love, then we would never have to descend. But obviously, we do have to descend. I don't think it's exactly a statement a factual statement about the real world, but I think it's what it feels like to him.
I just don't understand. I'm trying to imagine anticipating something, but somehow losing something as I'm anticipating it. I just can't it I can't get what the thought is.
Maybe, Tony, it's like I always wanted, to go skydiving. That was my, and I anticipated that for years, and I finally set it up. And believe it or not, I wasn't able to go because just as it was my turn, that it clouded over. And there's a part, that was lost in the anticipation in a very real way. And I think he might be talking about, as you get old, there's all these things you wanted to do as a youth or thought you were going to accomplish. And then I don't want to go skydiving now because I'll probably bust my knee or something.
And
So
why wasn't that lost? The actuality was lost. It was never realized. The anticipation was never realized. But he's saying lost in the anticipation.
Mhm.
What's lost in the anticipation?
Well, Douglas had a thought about that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's just
good
that
point.
you spend all the time you spent anticipating something, whether or not it happened. You could have been doing other things during that
Oh,
time,
okay.
That's
and
a
so
good point. Yeah.
you lost that time that was spent
Okay.
in anticipation.
I think that you might have it, Doug.
It also a lot of times people, if you're afraid of doing something and you're anticipating and and then or like you got to clean the garage up and you're just like, oh man, I can't. I don't know, and you put it off, put it off, put it off, and then finally when you do it and it takes a half an hour, it's like, why was I so worried about this?
Yeah, like I could dust the furniture in this house. That's pretty funny.
I had a little different take on that. I was thinking that because clearly this is a much more introspective poem than the earlier ones. I mean, he's clearly ruminating about his own thoughts and memories and hopes and dreams and so on. But I thought this might have meant that love, because he was a man who was very attracted to women and really loved women. Maybe in his this stage of his life where he was at physically, he really couldn't pursue that. And so, and anticipation is a big part of what attracts people to other people. So he's lost that anticipation. A descent follows, but he's already made the point that within a descent is not just a negative thing, that it opens up other thoughts and other possibilities. So I think he's kind of trying to come to grips with things that he can't do anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the anticipation or longing for something is part of it. It's part with if you weren't anticipating or longing for something, then that's all the drama. Once it happens,
I think I think that's what he's saying.
that's what he's saying.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, for me, it is. He's saying what is denied to love, what we have lost in the anticipation, which is part of what's so appealing about love, is the anticipation of what may follow. But when we lost that, a descent follows, endless and indestructible. I don't know.
I'm still a little puzzled. I'd like to have William here and ask him that.
He'd only confuse you more.
It's true. That's true. Yeah, but I think it's a beautiful poem, and it's just hard to overstate how important this is for Williams's poetic career, how much of an opening it led to, because like a lot of his greatest poetry is late. And it's a whole different kind of poetry. Not entirely. There are some poems that are still recognizable in terms of the early poetry, but a lot of it is just this more expansive, more ruminative, more musing, more inward poetry. And I've given you some examples. Okay, I want to.
A lot of pictures from Bruegel is fun, though.
Yeah, it is.
It is in some ways more lighthearted than a lot of the early poetry.
It is fun. It is fun. And he was never heavy-hearted like T.S. Eliot. He was bouncy. Williams, like Tigger. Okay, I want to just talk to you for a few minutes about this poem, The Desert Music, which, as I said, I couldn't reproduce for you, but it's the other poem that really gets him into writing the late poetry. He had a heart attack in 1948, strokes in 1949 and 1951. In 1951, he was invited to read to the Phi Beta Kappa convocation at Harvard in June. And he's writing in this poem, this very unusual poem to read at a Phi Beta Kappa convocation, like really unusual. But he's writing about this experience that he had, which was, again, an experience of absolute descent into poverty, not no money poverty, but the poverty of abjection, the poverty of one's own mortality. And it tells a story about a trip that he and Flossie took with a couple of friends to into Juarez, from El Paso to Juarez. And he's telling about walking on the bridge between Juarez and El Paso and seeing this thing. The others waited while you inspected it. On the very walk itself, is it alive? Neither a head, legs, nor arms. It isn't a sack of rags someone has abandoned here, torpid against the flange of the supporting girder. An inhuman shapelessness, knees hugged tight up into the belly, egg-shaped. So there's a lot of important stuff going on here. The egg, of course, is the germ of life, the basic and essential form of life. But this is presumably a person who is so abjectly impoverished that it's hard to recognize him as a person. Is it a bundle of rags? He says, what a place to sleep on the international boundary, where else the interjurisdictional not to be disturbed. Interjurisdictional would be in between systems of law. And this becomes sort of an important, almost like a pun or a metaphor later for the place that poetry can have its origins interjurisdictionally. And then he starts asking himself, how shall we get said what must be said? Only the poem, only the counted poem to an exact measure, to imitate, not to copy nature, not to copy nature, not prostrate to copy nature, but a dance, to dance two and two with him, sequestered there asleep, right end up. And he goes on and talks more about poetry and his agony at wanting to find a kind of poem that can begin again, that can descend this far into abjectness, into mortality, and find its egg-shaped self there, you know. And then he backs up, and it's a flashback, and he tells about he's been on a lecture trip, a reading trip to California with Flossie, and he comes back on the train, and they're going to visit a friend, thinking of Paris, which is where he'd been in the 1920s. I woke to the tick of the rails, the jagged desert to tell. And he's saying, you know, it's like this is a fun trip. It's going to be a fun trip with an old friend that he hasn't seen for a long time. They're going to have memories of Paris in the 1920s and so on, and they're going to visit and have dinner and so on. So they go to the old market, and he takes us on this journey through Juarez, this otherness, this other place across the international boundary. And they see the bull ring, and they see the paper flowers, and they see the baked red clay utensils, and they see, you know, some rich Texans down there, and they see a bunch of sparrows and some alligators. And then they see children begging for money. Penny, please. Give me penny, please, mister. Instinctively, one has already drawn one's naked wrists away from those obscene fingers, as in the mind of vague apprehension speaks and the music rouses. And then they go into a bar, and they see this, you know, kind of a burlesque dancer. Wow, look at her. You'd have to be pretty drunk to get a kick out of that. She's no Mexican, some worn out trooper from the States. Look at those breasts. But he, naturally being him, gets a kick out of it. He says, there's a fascination seeing her shake the beaded sequins from a string about her hips. She gyrates, but it's not what you think. One does not laugh to watch her belly. One is moved, but not at the dull show. The guitarist yawns. She can't even sing. She has about her painted hardihood a screen of pretty doves which flutter their wings. Her cold eyes perfunctorily moan, but do not smile. yet they bill and coo by grace of a certain candor. She is heavy on her feet. The music, I like her. She fits the music. So we're thinking about, okay, what is this music? And it's not just the cheap old da 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 da, you know, of the music for the burlesque dancer. It's something else that's starting to like kind of buzz or ring or echo in his mind. The music that certain things awaken. The begging children, this egg-shaped bundle on the bridge, the can-can dancer, not can-can, burlesque dancer. And then he says there's a false music too, the nauseating prattle about their souls and loves, right? This place is rank with it. And then they go, he says, what in the form of an old whore in a cheap Mexican joint in Juarez, her beer can wiggling crazily, can be so refreshing to me, raised to my ear so sweet a tune, built of such slime. So that's pretty like rough about women, but still he's asking himself, like, what is it? And then he has this thing where he addresses himself like somebody's talking to him and says, so this is Carlos Williams, the poet. Floss and I had half consumed our quartered hearts of lettuce before we noticed the others hadn't touched theirs. You seem quite normal. Can you tell me, why does one want to write a poem? Says somebody in this restaurant to him. Because it's written. Oh, a matter of inspiration then? Of necessity. Oh, but what sets it off? I am that he whose brains are scattered aimlessly. And he's just like getting so depressed. And here's this person coming up like, what makes you write a poem? You seem quite normal. Why would you want to write a poem, you know? And then they going back again toward the bridge. The music has reawakened as we leave the busier parts of the street and come again to the bridge in the semi-dark, pay our fee and begin to cross, seeing the lights across along the mountain back of El Paso, and pause to watch the boys calling out to us to throw more coins to them standing in the shallow water. So you're a poet. A good thing to be got rid of, half drunk, a free dinner under your belt, even though you get typhoid, and to have met people you can at least talk to. Relief from that changeless, endless, inescapable, and insistent music. And then he sees this being again. What's that? Oh, come on. They're trying to, come on, let's go. But what's that? The music, as when Casals struck and held a deep cello tone, and I am speechless. There it sat in the projecting angle of the bridge flange as I stood aghast and looked at it in the half light. Shapeless, or rather returned to its original shape, armless, legless, headless, packed like the pit of a fruit into that obscure corner, or a fish to swim against the stream, or a child in the womb prepared to imitate life, warding its life against a birth of awful promise. The music guards it, a mucus, a film that surrounds it, a benumbing ink that stains the sea of our minds, to hold us off, shed of a shape close as it can get to no shape, a music, a protecting music. I am a poet. I am, I am, I am a poet, I reaffirmed, ashamed. Now the music volleys through as in a lonely moment I hear it. Now it is all about me, the dance, the verb detaches itself, seeking to become articulate. And I could not help thinking of the wonders of the brain that hears that music and of our skill sometimes to record it. So could you kind of follow that, Douglas?
Yeah, well, for one thing, that's the first time I've ever heard the word mucus in a poem, but
They'll put it in there.
but there are so many different structures or forms in the poem. I'm reading it in the book, so there's places where the line lengths are completely different and structures are really different. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's a very experimental poem. Parts of it are in, short lines, parts of it are little choppy stanzas, parts of it are much more open. And it keeps changing. It's telling a bunch of stories all at the same time, but it's telling this experience, which was a kind of a rebirth experience for him as a poet, based on the ability to go all the way down to abjection and you know, both economic poverty and also the poverty that everybody experiences in our most needy physical states, you know. So the desert music, it's the music that comes out of the desert. It's the music that comes out of the wasteland.
You said the dancer was like, I think you said a can dancer or something.
I said it wrong. She's a burlesque dancer.
Burlesque dancer. Is that indicated in the poem? If so, I missed it because I was identifying it as a flamenco dancer. The
She's got a bare
guitarist.
butt. Yeah, she's got a bare butt. She's like stripping. She's doing the hoochie coochie.
Well, okay. The guitarist. They mentioned a guitarist accompanist. That would be flamenco. You'd have a guitarist and a dancer.
Mm-hmm. I'll find
Leslie's shaking her head.
you. I'll find you the
I
lines.
think the implication might be that if she is trying to do flamenco, she can't really do it.
Okay.
I don't know that. I'm just guessing that that's
I don't think you're going to find flamenco just over the border in Mexico.
No.
No.
And I also think the thing that's interesting me is that he has sort of loose boundaries and he is inhabiting these things that he's seeing. He is becoming this sort of prenatal life form. And everybody else is making fun of the dancer. He's really, he's really feeling like he's almost inhabiting it himself, I think.
Yeah, at one point in the poem he calls her Andromeda, you know. Yeah, I mean, you're right. He has very loose boundaries and he can inhabit and kind of get a kick out of or groove on all different kinds of people, you know. But she's nobody's idea of a conventional beauty, you know. But she's expressive, right? And then you've got the fingers reaching out to touch him. You know, there's so much about tactileness in this poem, so much about what we see, what we smell, what we eat. I mean, he's eating lettuce. He's going to be pretty sick afterwards, probably, you know, him and Flossie downing their lettuce salads. And there's just so much about this experience, this crossing the border, crossing the boundaries, going into this other place where, you know, need is a lot more nakedly revealed than it is in the wealthier United States. And then there's his own past, that Parisian past when he and Flossie spent 6 months in Paris in the 1920s and they were trying to decide if they wanted to be expatriate writers. And he was hanging out with Ezra Pound and so on, you know, and Robert McGowan and so on, and other writers and owners of small presses and so on. So it's like this whole kind of autobiography of the self as an old man with its memories, with its feeling like everything's over now. But then, and the word ashamed is super important. I am a poet. I am. I reaffirmed ashamed. To me, ashamed cuts both ways, both that he's ashamed that he forgot that, but also to feel shame is a kind of holy quality. You know, it's like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, when they were naked, they were ashamed. And I think all of that is kind of working there. This great affirmation. This is what poetry comes from. Poetry comes from that egg-shaped birth and death, all scooched up together in one bundle of rags.
I took ashamed in a much smaller, more specific sense. Partly what you said, I'm ashamed that I forgot I am a poet, but also a little bit, I'm ashamed that I have to tell myself I am a poet, I am a poet.
Yeah.
So I don't know that the other kinds of shames are more than suggested there.
I do, because I think that he's learning to think of poetry as a holy calling.
Wow.
Well, and because somewhere in there, somebody's saying, "Well, you look like a normal person. How can you be a poet?" And he has to grasp the fact that, well, that is something. It's not, you know, that's not a toss-off line. This is who he is.
Yeah, absolutely. I love those lines. You look like a normal person. What makes you want to write a poem? It's like, oh, yeah. So comments on what we've talked about today, or any other questions? So what makes a great line a great line? What do you guys think? What makes a great line a great line?
It's surprising.
Surprising.
Yeah.
I'd say some lines leap out at you as great lines, but lines can be part of a great poem and not leap out at you
Yeah.
as great lines. And something that is a great line in context, King Lear saying never, 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 never is an example. In another context, or with no context at all, would just be 5 adverbs.
True.
I know it when I see it.
Heidegger has a term uncovered, or he writes in German, so it's not uncovered. But the idea is a line reveals something to you, opens a door, uncovers something that you hadn't noticed before. I think that usually strikes me as an aspect of a great line.
Yeah, that's a really good thing to say. Right. But you're kind of right, you know it when you see it. And people's great lines, that's going to vary from person to person. Yeah. But it's good to cultivate your own great lines, like the ones that you really love. It was Sakharov, the Soviet dissident who was in prison for a long time, and he said, "I only wish that I had memorized more poems." Because that's what he could do, is recite to himself the poems that he had memorized. So Peter would be okay. I would be like, well, I got 2 of them in there.
Takes more than that to survive in prison.
It does.
Peter, you don't know what it takes to survive in prison, do you?
No, not from immediate experience.
Okay, I'm kind of relieved at that. But Anne's right. Your memory is just astonishing.
It's handy.
Thank you.
It's handy for me. Okay,
It's
guys.
handy. You could just, instead of going to Google, you can ask Peter something.
Exactly. Yep. Well, guys, have a really good few days, and I will see you Tuesday. Good.
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anne.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks, Anne.